The demolition order came through on a Tuesday, which was a meaningless designation on a station that had stopped tracking planetary time cycles 4 years ago. I only knew it was Tuesday because my personnel pad still synced to Compact Standard, the same pad I used to log every clearance form, every asset manifest, every room-by-room disposition code for structures the Compact had decided were no longer worth maintaining. I was very good at that work. It paid well enough. It asked nothing of me except patience and a willingness to walk through dying places alone. Ondavar 7 had been a relay station once, communications hub for the outer Oran sector, a designation that meant nothing now that the Oran Concordat had been absorbed into the 3rd Meridian Compact 5 years ago. The station was listed in our records as a decommissioned auxiliary asset, no current strategic value, orbital decay projected at 18 months, demolition scheduled to preempt uncontrolled re-entry. My job was to arrive, walk every corridor, catalog every piece of hardware worth salvaging, and certify that nothing of compact interest remained aboard before the charges were set. Standard work. I had done it 41 times before. Ondavar 7. I docked at 0630 station local, which was to say 0630 on my pad because the station's own chronometers had given up somewhere around the 2nd year of abandonment. The docking collar engaged with a groan that suggested the seals needed replacing. I noted that in the intake form. Everything needed replacing on a station like this. That was usually why we demolished them. The airlock cycled. I stepped through, pulled my scanner off my belt, and started the intake sweep. The corridor beyond the airlock was dim, which I expected. What I did not expect was the smell, not the dead metal and recycled nothing smell of a truly abandoned structure, but something closer to the smell of a place where someone still cooked. A faint warmth underneath the cold. The atmospheric recyclers were running, cycling, at low efficiency, but running. Someone had kept them running. I stopped. I checked the manifest again. Ondavar 7. Population 0. Last confirmed human or sentient presence. Departure of Compact Transition Team 4 years, 2 months prior. I checked the airlock sensor log. 1 biosign, station interior, registered for approximately 4 years, 2 months. I stood in that corridor for a moment and looked at the number on my pad. Then I kept walking. Her name, as far as the manifest was concerned, was Unit 7T. That was how the transition team had logged her. They had found her in the maintenance wing during their sweep, and apparently decided that reclassifying a living being as a numbered unit was easier than filing the paperwork for an others list. Unauthorized occupant. I had seen that before. Not often, but I had seen it. She was listed under Maintenance Auxiliary, non-essential. Her function was noted as Atmospheric Recycler Upkeep and General Structural Maintenance. Her species designation read simply, Oran. Her personal name was left blank. I found her in the main corridor junction on level 3, in the middle of replacing a panel section on the atmospheric ducting. She had a toolkit open on the floor beside her, a real kit, well organized, not the improvised kind, and she was working with the steady, unhurried economy of someone who had done this particular repair many times before. She heard me coming and turned. She was tall for an Oran. They ran slightly slender as a species, long-limbed, with a stillness about their faces that could read as cold if you did not know them. Her skin was gray-green in the way of deep-range Oran genetics, a shade that shifted slightly in the corridor's low light, not dramatically, just enough that you noticed it was not quite any color you had a name for. Her hair was dark and cut close to her skull, practical. Her eyes were copper amber, the kind of color that seemed to hold light from somewhere the light was not. She had a smear of duct sealant across her left forearm, and she was looking at me with an expression that I could not immediately read. Not fear, not hostility, something more careful than either of those. Compact, she said. It was not a question. Archive Division. I said. Field Survey. I held up the pad so she could see the clearance badge. I'm here to catalog the station's assets before demolition. I'm not enforcement." She looked at the badge for a moment. Then, she looked back at me. "When is demolition?" she said. 48 hours from my arrival certification, which I filed at docking, minus however long it took me to walk here." I paused. "There's an extraction provision. For any registered occupant, I can file the paperwork before I leave." "I am not registered as an occupant," she said. "I am registered as non-essential maintenance auxiliary." "I know what you're registered as," I said. "I can change it." She studied me for a long moment. The corridor hummed around us, the low, persistent hum of recyclers working below their rated capacity, not the sound of a dead place. The sound of a place someone had kept alive. "You have a name?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment, longer than felt comfortable. Not evasive, more like someone deciding how much weight to give, a simple question. "Thessane," she said finally. "Korvan Idris," I said. "Field surveyor, 3rd classification. You can call me Korvan." She did not tell me to call her anything other than Thessane. She turned back to the panel and continued working. I noted in my intake log that the station had 1 living occupant and moved on to begin the formal catalog. I had 48 hours on Ondavar, 7, and I intended to use them properly. That was the job, not to rush through a structure and tick boxes, but to actually walk it, actually look at what was there, actually make considered judgments about what had value and what did not. I had known surveyors who treated demolition clearances as formalities, who filed their forms from the airlock and never went deeper than the first corridor. I was not that kind of surveyor. Partly because the compact's asset records were full of errors made by men like that, and those errors had a way of biting everyone eventually. And partly because I had enough respect for a structure's existence to at least witness it properly before I signed the order that ended it. There was another reason too, one I had not fully articulated to myself until a few years into the work. The structures I cleared were not nothing. They were the physical residue of decisions people had made to build something, to organize something, to commit resources and labor and time to the creation of a place where people would live and work. Even a decommissioned relay station in orbital decay had once been someone's deliberate act of imagination. Someone had decided this station should exist and had brought it into existence. That decision deserved a witness, not a savior. I was not under any illusion that I could or should save every structure the compact had decided to demolish, but a witness. Someone who walked the corridors and noted what had been there before it was gone. I thought about that more than usual on Ondavar, 7, in the early hours of the first day, because the station kept revealing things I had not expected. Ondavar, 7, had been something, once. You could see it in the bones of the place. The corridor junctions were wide and generous, built for traffic, for the kind of organized movement a functioning relay hub produced. The panel architecture was different from compact standard, more organic in its lines, less modular, built around a philosophy that suggested a structure should flow rather than stack. Some of the panels were decorative in ways that pure utility would never have bothered with. Small inlaid patterns at the corridor junctions. A color progression in the lighting strips that shifted from warm to cool as you moved from the residential sections toward the operational core, as if someone had wanted the people who lived here to feel the difference between home and work. 4 years of low maintenance had worn at it, seals failing, panels darkening, a quarter of the lighting strips dead, but the bones were still good. That was the thing about Oren construction. It was built to last in a way that compact standard was not. Our engineers optimized for cost and replaceability. Theirs had optimized for permanence. I noted that in my catalog, and I kept walking. Thessane appeared in the corridor outside the central library at about the 4th hour of my sweep. I had not called for her. She had a tray with 2 portions of something that smelled like reconstituted grain and a thin broth of some kind, and she set it on the floor beside me without ceremony. "The ration stocks are adequate for 2, she said, "for another week or so." I looked at the tray. Then I looked up at her. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know," she said. She settled herself against the opposite wall, cross-legged, with her own portion, and began eating. I sat down on the floor. It was the kind of thing you either did or you did not, sitting on the floor of a dying station with a woman the manifest called non-essential, eating reconstituted grain out of a field ration tray. I did it. The food was not bad. She had done something to it with spices I did not recognize, something that cut the industrial flatness of the reconstituted base and introduced a faint warmth that I could not identify as any particular flavor, but which made the meal more than fuel. "How long have you been on the station?" I asked. Not to interrogate, I already knew the approximate answer from the biosign log, but because it seemed like the kind of question you asked a person. "Since the transition team left," she said. 4 years, and, she paused, "some months." "They left you here." "They did not notice me," she said. "Or, they noticed me and decided noticing me was inconvenient." I thought about the manifest entry, Unit 7T, non-essential. "I'm going to change your registration status before I file," I said. "You're a person, not a maintenance unit. That affects your extraction rights." She looked at me steadily. The copper-amber eyes were very level, not challenging, not grateful, just measuring. "You have the authority to do that," she said. It was not quite a question. "I'm the surveyor of record," I said. "The manifest is my document. I can correct an error. Classifying a living being as a maintenance auxiliary is an error." Something shifted very slightly in her expression. Not the grand kind of shift, not what you would describe to someone afterward as a transformation. A small settling, the way a body settles when a tension it has been holding releases without announcement. "Thank you," she said. We ate the rest of the meal in silence that was not uncomfortable. When we were done, she collected both trays with the efficiency of someone who had never wasted emotion in 4 years of living alone, and she said, "The archive on level 5 has a humidity problem in the upper tier. You will want to note it before you catalog the hardware." "I appreciate that," I said. "The duct seal on junction 17 also needs replacing," she said. "I have not had the parts." "I may have parts in my supply kit," I said. "I'll look." She nodded once, concisely, and walked away down the corridor. I watched her go, and I noted, in the part of my mind that was not the professional part, that she walked like someone who knew exactly where they were, not just geographically, but in the deeper sense. Someone who had arrived at a clear-eyed understanding of their situation and had made their peace with it, and who moved through the world from that position of understanding. It was not a comfortable quality or an easy one, but it was a real one. I went back to my catalog. By the 12th hour, I had cataloged levels 1 through 4 and begun on the operational core. This was where the real work was: the relay hardware, the archive systems, the navigation and communications infrastructure. Most of it was obsolete by compact standards, but some of it had salvage value, and all of it needed a formal disposition notation. The core library was on level 5, behind a pressure door that had sealed itself at some point and required a bypass to open. I filed the bypass code, waited for the system to process, and stepped through. The library was the most intact room I had seen on the station. 4 walls of archive towers, physical storage units, of the kind the Orin had preferred, dense lattice systems that held records in layered crystalline matrices rather than the magnetic formats, compact standard, used. They were powered down, but intact. The emergency charging circuit was still live, which meant the records were likely still readable if you had the right interface equipment. I had brought interface equipment. I always brought interface equipment. I set up my reader at the central terminal and began the inventory scan. The scan would take several hours to complete. The system would enumerate the archive contents, flag anything flagged as compact property under the absorption treaty, and note everything else for the disposition record. Standard procedure. While the scan ran, I cataloged the physical room, the archive towers themselves, the terminal hardware, the pressure door integrity, the climate systems keeping the record stable. I was 2 hours into that work when the Seine appeared in the doorway. "I can assist with the archive inventory," she said. "I know the filing structure." I looked up. "You worked with these archives?" "I maintained them," she said, "among other things." "You know Oren crystalline lattice filing systems?" "I do." "That would save me about 6 hours," I said. "Come in." She crossed to the secondary terminal and pulled up the filing index from memory, not by searching for it, but by entering the directory path directly from recall. With the ease of someone who has used a system for years, I watched her hands on the terminal. Maintenance workers learned the systems they maintained, of course. But there was something in the way she moved through the menus, not the careful, deliberate navigation of someone who had learned a system functionally, but the fluid, habitual movement of someone for whom the system had once been native territory. Someone who had not just maintained it, but had lived inside it. I said nothing. It was not my place to speculate about a woman's history. From the way her hands moved on a keyboard, I went back to my physical catalog. We worked in parallel for a while, in comfortable quiet. The scan progressed. The Seine called out filing notations, and I logged them. The archive was mostly operational records, relay traffic logs, maintenance reports, administrative correspondence from the station's active years, nothing flagged as compact property. Compact property tended to mean things the absorption treaty had explicitly claimed. The Oren Concordat's political and administrative records had been exempted from that claim, which was a strange kind of generosity from an absorbing government, but which I had long since stopped wondering about. Then the scan hit the station's identity registry. I heard the terminal change tone before I saw the alert. Not an alarm, just a different kind of chime, the kind that indicated a protocol trigger. I crossed to the primary terminal and looked at the screen. The identity registry for Ondavar 7 had contained, among other things, the station's original crew manifest, standard information. But the scan had found something attached to that manifest, a thread. The archive system's notation called it a verification thread that had been registered against one of the crew identities and had never been closed. The thread was dormant. It had been dormant for years. But my scan had triggered its query function, which had in turn pinged the biometric sensors still active in the room, and the biometric sensors had matched. The match was filed under crew identity Oren 7T. I read the screen. I read it again. I had been a field surveyor for 11 years. I had walked through 41 decommissioned structures before this one. I had found old records before military histories, treaty documents, personnel files that turned out to be more complicated than they appeared. I was not a man who startled easily. I was startled. I turned around. The Seine was still at the secondary terminal, working through the filing index. She had not looked up at the chime. She was logging a maintenance record from 6 years ago with the same steady, unhurried efficiency she brought to everything, and she was not looking at me. And I stood there for a moment with the screen behind me and tried to decide how to begin. "The Seine," I said. "There is a section of relay traffic logs that may have compact relevance," she said. "Communications from the absorption transition period. Do you want me to flag them separately?" "In a moment," I said. "Can you come look at this screen?" She turned. She crossed the room and looked at the screen over my shoulder. I did not look at her face when she first read it. I was looking at the screen myself, at the text of the verification thread, at the full identification record it had pulled from the dormant archive. I read it again, in case I had made an error the first time. I had not made an error. The record was formal, old-style Oren administrative language, the kind that had been standard before the absorption. There was a name at the top. A full name, the kind the Oren used for their senior lineage members, with the house designation and the formal title and the registration codes for the verification thread that proved identity beyond disputation. The kind of thread that existed specifically because the Oren had known that records could be erased and had designed a backup for exactly that eventuality. The verification thread was unbreakable. It was designed to be unbreakable. You could erase the name from every official record in the compact, but you could not erase the thread if it was matched to a living biometric and the station housing it was still powered. The name at the top was Thessane. Below the name were the title designations. I read them all. Then I turned around. She was looking at the screen with an expression I had not seen on her face before, not the careful, measuring look she had given me at every other moment, not the steady quiet she maintained while she worked. Something older and harder and more private than either of those things, the expression of a person confronting something they had once made a decision about and are now finding themselves unable to maintain that decision in the face of an unexpected witness. You know what that says, I said. It was not a question, and she did not treat it as one. Yes, she said. I looked at the screen again, then back at her. The compact's record shows the RN Royal line as dissolved at absorption, I said. Extinct, their notation says. The throne classifications were archived as historical. I know what the compact's record says. This record says something different. The compact's record is 5 years old, she said. This record is older. I looked at the screen one more time. I was not trying to verify what I had already verified, but I think I was buying time to choose my words carefully, which was a habit I had developed over 11 years of walking through places where things were more complicated than they appeared, and saying the wrong thing had consequences. Thessane, I said, regnant of the Oran Concordat, senior lineage, third verification tier, uncontested accession on the date of record. She said nothing. That's what this screen says, I said. I know what it says. You've been on this station for 4 years, I said. Classified as a maintenance auxiliary, non-essential. Yes. And the station was demolished, I said, in 48 hours, minus the time elapsed since my arrival. Yes, she said. I looked at her. She was looking at the screen still, not at me, and her face had the quality of someone standing in front of something they have looked at privately for a very long time and have now been required to look at in front of another person. I thought about the way she had moved through the archive menus, not like maintenance staff, but like someone for whom the archive had once been a working environment, a professional environment, a governmental environment. I thought about the ration stores, adequate for 2. I thought about the atmospheric recyclers she had kept running for 4 years in an abandoned station on the edge of orbital decay. Waiting. What were you waiting for? I asked. The question came out more directly than I had intended. Possibly more gently, too. She finally looked at me. A courier, she said. There was a channel, under the absorption treaty, for formal objection to dissolution classifications. A courier was supposed to come with the filing forms. The courier did not come. When was the courier supposed to come? 41 months ago. 41 months. 3.5 years of recycling air in a dying station, maintaining systems that no one would ever need maintained, eating reconstituted grain alone in a place the compact had decided was worth less than nothing, waiting for a courier who had apparently been lost or misfiled or simply forgotten in the machinery of an organization large enough that a queen could vanish into its records and no one would notice. I had a thought that was not a professional thought, and which I set aside for the moment. I turned back to the terminal. The verification thread creates a mandatory hold, I said. That's Compact Archive Protocol 7, Section 4. Any living biometric match against a registered verification thread from a recognized governmental entity, even a dissolved one, triggers a mandatory verification hold on any pending demolition or disposition order. She was very still. The demolition order is currently pending, I continued. It was filed at my arrival certification. I have not yet stamped the clearance. 1. You have not yet stamped it, she repeated slowly. I have not, I said, and with the verification thread active and matched, I cannot stamp it without voiding the hold first. Voiding the hold requires compact judicial review, minimum 30 standard days. During that period, the structure is considered a protected asset. She turned and looked at me fully. The copper-amber eyes were very steady. Something in them had changed, not broken open, not flooded, just changed. The way a held posture changes when a person finally allows themselves to breathe fully after a long time of careful, rationed breathing. "You're saying the demolition cannot proceed," she said. "I'm saying the demolition cannot legally proceed while the hold is active," I said. "And the hold is active. The compact will contest the hold. They can try. The verification thread is unbreakable RN design, as I understand it. If they want to contest it, they'll need to disprove the match, and the match is biometric, registered against a living person currently standing in this room." She was quiet for a moment. "Corvin," she said, my name, in her voice, with a weight behind it that a name does not always carry. "You understand what you are doing." "I'm following Compact Archive Protocol," I said. "Section 7, subsection 4. I'm very consistent about following protocol." Something that was almost a different expression. Not quite what I would call a smile yet, but its precursor. The shift in the muscles around the eyes that comes before crossed her face and was gone. "The transition team would have seen the thread if they had done a proper scan," I said. "They did not do a proper scan. That's the error in the record. I'm correcting the error. By voiding the demolition. By filing the mandatory hold that the protocol requires, yes." She looked at the screen, at her own name, written out in the old formal style, with the house designation and the title and the verification codes. I thought about what it must be like to look at your own name on a screen that had been trying to say your name for 4 years in an empty room. And I thought about the moment, if such a moment had any logic in it, when something you had set aside finally becomes real again, not because you decided it would, but because a stranger showed up and read the screen aloud. "The compact abolished the RN throne at absorption," she said quietly. "The record will say the dissolution stands regardless of the thread." The compact's record also said this station had 0 occupants, I said. "The compact's record has been wrong before." She was quiet again for a moment, a longer moment. The archive towers hummed around us, the crystalline matrices holding their records in the dark, patient and undecayed, doing the thing they had been built to do. "The hold will not restore the concordat," she said. "One station's verification thread does not override a treaty." "I'm a field surveyor," I said. "I don't know anything about restoring concordats. I know about station manifests and disposition codes and archive protocols." I paused. "I know that the manifest currently has you listed as non-essential, and I know that's wrong. And I know that the hold creates 30 days of compact judicial review, during which your classification will be formally contested." I looked at her directly. "Whatever happens after that is above my clearance level, but the hold gets filed today." She looked at me for a long time. I had the sense, not for the first time since I had walked into the station, that she was a person who had learned to be very careful about what she allowed herself to feel, and that this carefulness was not a native quality, but a trained one, acquired over 4 years of aloneness in a place where there was no one to feel anything at or with. I recognized that kind of careful. I had my own version of it. "Why?" she said. It was a simple question, and it deserved a simple answer, so I gave her one. "Because you're on this station," I said. "Because you kept it running. Because you were here when the courier didn't come, and you're still here now, and that means something." I paused. "And because the manifest had you listed as non-essential, and you're the furthest thing from non-essential that I have encountered in 41 of these clearances." She looked at me. The copper-amber eyes were very still, very level, holding something I could not fully name, not disbelief, but the neighbor of disbelief. The feeling that comes when something you stopped expecting arrives anyway, and your heart has not quite caught up to the fact of it. "The courier didn't come," she said. "I thought for a long time, I thought the channel had been deliberately closed, that no courier was ever sent." that the formal objection process had been a provision in the treaty with no mechanism behind it. I can pull the courier dispatch records when I get back to Compact Central, I said. If the courier was misfiled, rather than deliberately blocked, that matters for the judicial review. It matters very little to me whether it was deliberate, she said. It might matter to the judges. She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh, but contained the structure of one. You think like an archivist, she said. I am an archivist, I said. Third classification. You think like one who believes the record should be accurate. The record should always be accurate, I said. That's what I do. I make the record accurate. She was quiet again. Not the careful, measuring quiet of before something different. Softer. The quiet of someone who is, for the first time in a long time, not entirely alone with the thing they are carrying. I turned back to the terminal and began drafting the hold notification. It was a standard form I had filed holds before, though never under quite these circumstances. The form asked for the triggering protocol, the verification thread identification number, the biometric match confirmation, the duration of the hold, and the authorizing surveyor's credentials. I filled in each field carefully. I cross-referenced the verification thread number against the archive record to make sure I had it exact. I attached the biometric match log as supporting documentation. At the bottom of the form, there was a field for surveyor notes. It was optional, but I used it. I wrote, Occupant, currently listed as Maintenance Auxiliary, Non-Essential, Unit 7T, classification in error. Occupant is a living person with established identity per verification thread attached. Recommend manifest correction to registered occupant, essential classification, identity per record. Demolition hold filed in accordance with protocol. Surveyor of record certifies the above as accurate. I saved the form. I queued it for transmission. Then I filed the manifest correction. It was a shorter form. Name field, Tessane, species, Orin, classification, registered, occupant, essential. Personal note, verified against archive record, match confirmed, classification corrected from non-essential maintenance auxiliary per error in original transition team documentation. I submitted both forms. The transmission confirmation came back inside 40 seconds. Hold, active. Demolition order suspended, pending judicial review. Estimated review, commencement. 14 standard days. I turned around. Hold is filed, I said. Demolition is suspended. 14 days to review commencement. 30 days minimum review period. She had been watching me fill out the forms. I was not sure at what point she had moved to stand beside the terminal. I had been focused on the forms, and she moved quietly, but she was there. And she had read the surveyor notes field over my shoulder at some point, I thought, because her eyes were not quite the same as they had been. Not wet, exactly. Not the kind of thing you describe as tears. The kind of thing that happens in the eyes before tears, when something has arrived that the body has not yet agreed to fully receive. The manifest correction, she said quietly. It was wrong, I said. I corrected it. Essential classification, she said. Yes. She looked at the screen for a long time. Her own name, essential classification, correction, certified by the surveyor of record. A piece of paper, a form, a record, a thing in a system that said she was here, that she was real, that she counted. I understood something in that moment that I had understood before, in a different form, across 41 clearance assignments in dying structures. The record is not everything, but the record is the way the world officially agrees to remember you. When the record says you are non-essential, there is a kind of silence around your existence that is its own weight, regardless of what you know about yourself, regardless of how clearly you can see your own worth. When someone corrects the record, that weight lifts, not all at once, gradually, in the way that real things shift. Tessane, I said, I want to ask you something. She looked at me. The hold creates 30 days minimum review, I said. During review, Compact protocol requires a surveyor of record to remain accessible to the judicial panel. Accessible means available to answer questions about the circumstances of the hold filing. I paused. The most straightforward way to remain accessible is to remain on station. On station. She was very still. I have other clearances to file, I said. I have a caseload. But none of those clearances are time-sensitive the way this one was, and I have discretion over my scheduling. I looked at her evenly. If you are willing, I would like to remain on Ondavar, 7 for the duration of the hold period, as the surveyor of record. So that the panel has a point of contact, and so that the record, when it's reviewed, has a human face attached to it. You would stay, she said. I would stay, I said, if you're willing. It's your station. I'm a guest. The word landed in the air between us, guest, in a place where she had been alone for 4 years, in a station the compact had decided was worth nothing, in a structure she had maintained by herself in the specific, patient way of someone who believes that a thing worth building is worth keeping even when no one else agrees. Guest, a word that required a host. A word that made her, formally and simply, a person in a place she belonged. She looked at me for a long moment. The copper-amber eyes, the careful face, the small settling that happened around her shoulders when she made a decision. There is a second bunk in the crew quarters on level 2, she said. I have not used it. It may need the mattress seal replaced. End quote. I'll add it to the catalog, I said. I'm good at fixing things that need fixing. Something crossed her face then, all the way across it, unhurried, undeniable. Not the precursor to a smile, the actual thing. Quiet, contained. The kind of smile that has been away from a face for a long time and is relearning the territory. It lasted only a moment, but it was there, and it was real. Then you are welcome here, Korvan Idris, she said. The 14 days before the judicial review panel opened their case file were the quietest 14 days I had spent in 11 years of fieldwork. Not empty. Quiet has a different quality from empty. Quiet has texture, has the sounds of two people occupying the same space with purpose and without friction. Thessain had the morning watch on the atmospheric recyclers, a habit from 4 years of solo maintenance, and she kept it. I learned her schedule and arranged mine around it, taking the afternoon hours for the parts of the catalog work I had not yet completed, and leaving the evenings for the things that needed 2 pairs of hands. There were more of those things than I had initially estimated. A station kept running by one person, however capable, accumulates deferred maintenance, not from neglect, but from simple arithmetic. Some jobs require 2. We replaced the mattress seal in the crew quarters. We fixed the docking collar seals that had groaned at my arrival. We went through the lighting strips on level 3 and replaced the dead ones with units from the spare parts inventory she had compiled and stored with the organized care of someone who had been planning for a longer occupation than the manifest suggested. We ate together twice a day, and she told me, in small pieces, not the whole story. That was not the way of it, but small pieces of the shape of it. On the 5th day, I found her in the observation corridor on level 4, standing at one of the viewports that had accumulated too much exterior grime to see through clearly. She had a cleaning tool, a long-handled applicator from the maintenance kit, and she was working at the grime on the outside of the panel through a gap in the ceiling ring, methodically, unhurried. That window wasn't on the priority list, I said. No, she said. It is not a structural issue. I know that. She kept working. But it should be possible to see out of a window. I watched her for a moment. Then I went to my supply kit and found a secondary cleaning applicator and joined her at the seal gap. We worked on the window together in silence for about 20 minutes before the grime gave way enough for the view to become visible, the stars, the curve of the planetary body, the very faint arc of the station's own orbital path traced against the dark. She stood back and looked at it for a moment, then looked at me. Thank you, she said. It should be possible to see out of a window, I said. She held my gaze for a long moment, and then she went back to the corridor, and continued her morning route. I went back to my catalog and noted the viewport cleaning in the maintenance log, under miscellaneous improvements, and moved on. On the 9th day, she told me about the Concordat settlements, how the absorption had happened quickly, how there had been a formal diplomatic process, and then, faster than anyone had anticipated, a political one, and how the political process had moved to erase the Concordat's governance structures before the formal process had finished processing, how she had been on Ondavar 7 when the absorption was finalized, how she had decided to stay and wait for the courier rather than disappear into the general population of a political dissolution. "You had other options," I said one evening. We were on the observation deck, on level 6, a room with a broad viewport, the only room on the station that still had a clear view outward, the others having accumulated too much grime on the exterior panels for the view to be worth much. Outside, the stars were doing what stars do, which is to say, they were being constant and indifferent, and the faint curvature of the planetary body below us was just visible at the edge of the viewport. "I had options that required giving up the objection channel," she said. "If I had entered the general population as a private citizen, the dissolution classification would have stood. There would have been no formal position from which to contest it. Idea. And contesting it mattered. The Concordat was not the throne," she said. "It was 500 years of administrative structure. It was the legal standing for every Aran settlement in this sector. When the dissolution classified the throne as extinct, it classified that entire structure as dissolved. The settlements lost their formal designation, their resource allocation rights, their legal standing in border disputes." She looked at the stars. I was not waiting for a courier for my sake. I was quiet for a moment. "How many settlements?" I asked. 47 at the time of the absorption," she said. "Some of them have found other formal structures to shelter under since. Some have not." End quote. 47 settlements. The administrative standing of 47 communities riding on one woman's decision to stay in a dying station and wait for a courier, rather than disappear into the comfortable anonymity of private life. I had been doing this work for 11 years, and I still sometimes ran up against the gap between what records said and what records contained the lives inside the classifications, the people inside the numbers. "The judicial review," I said. "If it restores your formal standing." "It may not," she said. "The compact's position will be that the dissolution treaty supersedes the verification thread. The judges may agree. But it may." "It may," she said. She turned from the viewport and looked at me. The courier channel was a provision of the treaty. If the courier was dispatched and lost, that is a treaty failure. A treaty failure creates grounds for review of the dissolution itself. She paused. "I have been through the legal framework a great many times in 4 years. I imagine you have. The probability of a full restoration of the Concordat governance structure is not high," she said carefully. "The probability of a partial restoration of formal recognition of the throne as a historical continuity with some associated administrative standing for the settlements is better. The probability that the hold itself forces a formal acknowledgement that the dissolution was processed incorrectly is very high. And a formal acknowledgement means the settlements can use it in their border disputes," I said. "Among other things," she said, "I thought about 47 settlements. I thought about the careful, meticulous way she had maintained this station for 4 years, not out of habit or stubbornness, or because she had nowhere else to go, but because staying was a legal posture, a strategic position, a specific kind of refusal to allow the record to go unchallenged." "You're very patient," I said. "I have had time to practice," she said. "That's not the same thing," I said. "Patience isn't just time. It's choosing not to let the waiting make you less." She looked at me for a long moment. The stars outside shifted minutely in the viewport as the station continued its slow, indifferent orbit. I had found, over the preceding days, that she had a quality of attention that was unusual, not intense in the way of someone performing attentiveness, but genuinely present, genuinely receiving. She listened the way you would if every conversation might be the last one for a long time, which, for 4 years, every conversation had been. "No," she said. "That is not the same thing." A pause. "I am not sure I always succeeded at the distinction." "What did you do?" I asked. "In the second year? You mentioned it was the hardest." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars. "I cataloged the archive," she said. "All of it. Every record, every relay traffic log, every administrative document the station had ever produced. It took 4 months. I built a complete index of the contents, not because the compact would ever want the index, but because it needed doing. And because doing something that needed doing was a way of continuing to be a person rather than just a presence. I thought about the archive index she had called up from memory on the first day, not from the filing system, from her own mental map of the structure, built over months of deliberate, painstaking work. "The index you showed me on the first day?" I said. "You built that yourself?" "Yes," she said. "There were errors in the original filing system. I corrected them." A faint pause. "It seemed important that the records be accurate." "It is important," I said. "It's always important." She turned from the viewport and looked at me with a directness that had become familiar over the days, the Oran quality of looking at someone without the social softening that most species applied to sustained eye contact. Not aggressive, honest. The kind of looking that assumed the person being looked at could handle being seen. "You said something," she began, "when you filed the hold. In the surveyor notes field." She paused. "I read it over your shoulder. I should tell you that." "I know," I said. "I could see you reading. You wrote that I was the furthest thing from non-essential that you had encountered in 41 of these clearances." "I did," I said. "Did you mean it?" she said, "or was it a useful thing to have on the record?" I considered the question. It deserved a real answer, not a quick one. "Both," I said. "It was useful on the record. It was also true. Those two things are not in conflict." I looked at her. "You kept this station alive for 4 years. You maintained an archive that a government decided was worthless. You held a legal position, a strategic position, at considerable personal cost for people you had never met and who would never know your name. You did all of that in a structure the compact classified as having 0 occupants." I paused. "I have cataloged 41 structures. I have never found anyone like you in one." She was very still. The stars continued their patient indifference outside the viewport. "You're very patient," I said. "I have had time to practice," she said. "That's not the same thing," I said. "Patience isn't just time. It's choosing not to let the waiting make you less." She looked at me for a long moment. Outside, the planetary body turned slowly below, indifferent and enormous. "I have not always been successful at that," she said quietly. "There were months in the second year, particularly when the station felt very large." She paused. "When I had almost decided the courier was simply never going to come, and that I should acknowledge the fact and find a different kind of life." "But you didn't." "I didn't," she said. "I replaced the panel on the atmospheric ducting instead, and then the one beside it. And then I checked the ration stores, and they were sufficient for another season, and I decided that a season was a reasonable unit of time in which to continue waiting. I thought about the seal I had found on her toolkit, a manufacturer's mark from a compact military supply contractor, the kind of mark you found on equipment that had been distributed through official channels to specific official occupants. The transition team had left a maintenance kit behind. She had used it for 4 years to keep the station alive. "Season by season," I said. "Season by season," she said. We were quiet together for a while after that. The viewport held its stars and its slow planetary curve, and the station hummed around us, all its repaired panels, its running recyclers, its clean lighting strips on level 3, its carefully maintained archive towers in the core library. Everything kept up, everything functional. A structure still alive because one person had decided that keeping it alive was the specific form her refusal would take. The Judicial Review Panel opened their file on the 14th day. I was on the primary terminal in the core library when the notification came through. Thessain was beside me. We had taken to working in the same room for most of the afternoon hours, which made the work easier and also made the room feel different than it had on the first day, fuller somehow. The archive towers less like witnesses to an absence and more like what they had always been meant to be, a library, a place where records lived, in the presence of people who cared whether records were accurate. I read the notification aloud. Judicial Review Panel convened. Case number. I read the case number. Verification hold, filed by Field Surveyor Korvan Idris, Archive Division, 3rd Classification, against demolition order for station designation Ondavar, 7. Matter under review, identity verification, classification correction, and disposition of mandatory hold per Compact Archive Protocol 7, Section 4. I looked at Thessain. They've accepted the filing. They are required to accept it, she said. The protocol doesn't give them discretion. They're also required to notify the opposing party, I said. In this case, the Compact's Absorption Treaty Office. I read further down the notification. They've done that. The Absorption Treaty Office has 48 hours to file an initial response. They will file one, she said. I expect they will, I said. The response will almost certainly argue that the dissolution treaty supersedes the verification thread. I looked at the notification again. But it will also have to address the courier dispatch question. The panel is required to investigate factual claims. She was quiet for a moment. You mentioned that you could pull the courier dispatch records, she said. I can, I said. I've already submitted the request. It should come through in the next day or two. I looked at her directly. If the courier was dispatched, there will be a record. If the record shows a dispatch without confirmation of delivery, that's the treaty failure you need. And if the record shows no dispatch at all, she said steadily. If the courier was never sent, then we argue the treaty provision was void from the start, I said. A provision with no mechanism of enforcement is not a functioning provision. I paused. I'm not a lawyer. But I know how to read a document, and I know that a treaty that promises a formal objection channel and then doesn't staff the channel has a problem. She looked at me. Something in her face, not the careful measuring look, not the small, quiet smile, but something older and more direct than either of those. Something that had been waiting in the architecture of her expression for the right moment to surface. Korvan, she said, why are you doing this? I had answered a version of that question before and given her a version of an honest answer. This time I gave her the rest of it. Because I've walked through 41 dying structures, I said, and most of them were empty, just hardware and old records and the echo of whatever they used to be. And then I walked through this one, and there was someone still in it, keeping the lights on, waiting for something that should have come years ago and didn't. And the manifest said she was non-essential. I stopped. I don't accept that. I never have, for any structure. I'm certainly not going to accept it for the person who kept the structure alive. She held my gaze for a long moment, the copper amber eyes, the face that had learned over 4 years to keep its own counsel and carry its own weight. I have not allowed myself to hope, she said quietly. For a long time, it seemed like the most dangerous thing I could do. I know, I said. And now you are here, she said, and you have filed the hold and the panel is convened and you are staying. And I find that I do not entirely know how to, she paused. Searched for the word, receive that. You don't have to know how to receive it, I said. It's already here. She was very still. Outside, through the viewport at the end of the corridor visible from the library doorway, the stars were doing what they always did. Inside, the archive towers held their records in the dark, patient and complete, waiting as they had always waited to be read by someone willing to look. I had spent 11 years walking through structures that were waiting to be read. Structures that held more than their classification suggested, more than the manifests accounted for, more than the demolition orders acknowledged. I had grown accustomed to the weight of that. But I had never been in a room where the record and the person it described were both present at the same moment, both waiting, and the only thing required of me was to look at the screen and read what it said. "The panel will take time," she said, "many weeks." "Yes," I said. "And you intend to remain for all of it." "I intend to remain for all of it," I said. "As surveyor of record, as required by protocol." The precursor was there again, not the smile itself, but its structure, the shift in the face that knows what is coming. She looked at me, and it was there, and this time, it did not stop at the precursor. "Then you are very welcome here, Corvanidris," she said again. The same words as before, but different, the second time, heavier, more certain. The kind of welcome that means something other than hospitality, that means this place, this record, this 4 years of kept faith is yours to know. "Thank you," I said. We went back to work. The courier dispatch record came through on the 16th day. It showed a dispatch. The courier had been sent 41 months ago, as the Seine had said, right on schedule per the treaty provision. There was a dispatch confirmation in the record. There was no delivery confirmation. The record showed the courier vessel had been rerouted through a transit hub and had never come out the other side. And the follow-up filing, the one that should have been triggered when no delivery confirmation arrived within the standard window, had been processed but not executed. A clerical failure, the kind that happened in organizations large enough to mistake a person's future for a data entry. I filed the courier dispatch record with the judicial panel that afternoon. Thessain read the filing over my shoulder before I submitted it. She said nothing for a long time after I submitted it. Then she said, "It was not deliberate." "It appears not," I said. "I had assumed for some time, I had assumed it was deliberate." She paused. "It is strange that it should matter whether it was deliberate. The result was the same either way." "It matters," I said, "because it means the treaty was not void from the start. It means the treaty provision was real and functioning and simply failed in execution, which means the provision can be enforced now." "The panel will say so," she said, "in time, in 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 time." "Yes," I said, "in time." She was quiet again. I did not fill the quiet. Some silences carry more in them than any words you could put there. Later that evening, on the observation deck, with the stars and the slow planetary curve and the mended lighting strips all doing what they did, she said, "I used to be afraid that if I left the station before the courier came, I would not be there when the record was read, that the thread would fire and find an empty room." "The thread would have waited," I said. "The thread would have waited," she agreed. "But I would not have known, and I needed to know." She paused. "I needed to be in the room where my name was spoken." I thought about that for a long moment. The record and the person, the archive and the living biometric, the name in the system and the woman in the room, present and breathing and copper amber-eyed and patient in the way that patience becomes a form of love for the thing you are waiting for. "I'm glad you were here," I said. "I know," she said. "I am." She stopped, took a breath, started again. "I am glad you came." Outside, the station held its orbit, patient, intact, named in the compact's record as essential. "Welcome home,"